Wounded Redcoat officer took in a widow left alone with her daughter after the Boston battle. Before we immerse ourselves in this tale of shattered loyalties and unexpected refuge set against the tense, divided heart of revolutionary Boston, remember to subscribe to our channel. Join our growing community of history and romance enthusiasts so you never miss an epic story that explores the complex human cost of war. Now, let the story of Captain Ainsworth and Mrs. Hayes begin. Part 1. The Compulsory Sanctuary. Captain Thomas Ainsworth of the 43rd Regiment of Foot was a man built for the parade ground, not the makeshift infirmary. His wound, a crippling musket ball to the upper leg sustained at Breed's Hill, had saved him from further combat, but had condemned him to a slow, agonizing recovery in the hostile rear echelon of occupied Boston. He was 29, unmarried, and accustomed to the predictable order of aristocratic life in Kent. This colonial chaos was an insult to his sensibilities and his suffering. His temporary quarters were a commandeered two-story farmhouse near the neck of the peninsula, chosen for its sturdy build and distance from the restless town centre. It was here, amidst stacks of poorly inventoried supplies and the perpetual chill of a New England autumn, that his orderly, Sergeant Davies, presented him with an anomaly that defied military protocol. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes and her daughter. "Captain," Davies reported, his voice tight with disdain, "the woman was attempting to cross the picket line illegally, claimed she was retrieving personal property. Her husband, Silas Hayes, was listed among the rebel casualties. She's penniless, but worse, she's defiant." "And the child?" Thomas asked, not looking up from the mess of ledgers. His leg throbbed, a steady, miserable drumbeat. "A girl, 4 years old, looks peaky, name's Lily." Davies paused, then added pointedly, "Sir, she claims this is her home." Thomas finally raised his head. His blue eyes, usually calm and analytical, were shadowed with fatigue. "Silas Hayes, the rebel who owned this property. Of course, bring her in, Sergeant. I suppose I must observe the pretense of civilized conduct, even with the families of traitors." Eleanor Hayes entered, clad in a worn, dark woolen dress that seemed to absorb all available light. She held her daughter, Lily, who was pale and clinging to her neck. Eleanor possessed a quiet, unyielding presence. There was no theatrical pleading, only a cold, hard determination in her expression. "Captain Ainsworth," Eleanor began, her voice steady and clear, carrying the clipped accent of educated New Englanders, "I require safe passage to my belongings, which I require to survive the winter, and I require the assurance that my home will not be destroyed by your occupation." "Your husband fought against the Crown, Mrs. Hayes," Thomas replied, leaning heavily on the table, wincing slightly as he shifted his weight. "That action nullifies your rights to property in a time of war. The house is commandeered. The contents are, by extension, property of the Crown. My husband's choices do not define my daughter's need for shelter," Eleanor countered, stepping closer, forcing him to meet her gaze. "You sit in his chair, Captain. You sleep under his roof. Are your manners so corrupted by war that you would cast a woman and a child into the freezing streets simply to punish a dead man?" Thomas was momentarily speechless. Her directness was a breach of the expected deference. He looked at Lily, whose large, watchful eyes were fixed on his uniform. He saw not rebellion, but vulnerability. "I cannot and will not abandon my post, Mrs. Hayes," Thomas conceded, tapping his cane sharply against the wooden floor. "But I have no desire to be the instrument of your ruin. I shall offer you an alternative, one that saves your home from being utterly ruined by barracks life and saves you from the streets." He laid out the terms. Eleanor and Lily would occupy the small, single attic room, the only part of the house the soldiers would not use. She would be responsible for the household duties, cooking, cleaning, mending. In exchange, she and her daughter would receive rations, firewood, and the physical protection of the British garrison. She would be compensated a meager wage, enough for basic supplies. Above all, she was forbidden from passing on any information regarding military movements. "You ask me to be a servant to the man who represents my destruction," Eleanor stated, her jaw tight. "I ask you to choose survival, Mrs. Hayes. Your husband made his choice. Now you must make yours. It is that or immediate expulsion. The choice is made for your daughter, not for your pride." The stare she gave him was a mixture of icy contempt and painful resignation. "We stay, Captain, for Lily's sake." And so began the impossible arrangement. Part 2. The Unseen Line. The first weeks were a masterclass in silent antagonism. Eleanor moved through the house like a ghost, her presence marked only by the absence of dirt and the presence of simple, well-cooked meals. She spoke only when necessary, her answers clipped and precise. Thomas, confined mostly to the parlour and his ground-floor bedroom, found himself acutely aware of her every footstep on the stairs, every clatter of a pot in the kitchen. Sergeant Davies and the few enlisted men housed there were openly hostile toward Eleanor, viewing her as the rebel filth she was. Thomas, unexpectedly, found himself in the position of her defender. "Mind your tongues and your hands, Private," Thomas snapped one evening when he overheard a crude comment directed at Eleanor. "She is under my command, and any insubordination toward her is insubordination toward me. She's a woman of good conduct, and you will treat her as such." His intervention was not born of affection, but a deep-seated code of honor. His father had drilled into him the duty of a gentleman to protect the vulnerable, regardless of station or conflict. The relationship between the Redcoat officer and the rebel widow began to thaw subtly, not through shared conversation, but through the shared humanity of Lily. Lily, oblivious to the political chasm between the adults, was drawn to the large, wounded man who occupied her home. One afternoon she crept into the parlour and found Thomas struggling to tie the ribbons on a box of important correspondence, his injured leg making the task awkward. "Help," Lily commanded, standing beside his chair. Thomas, startled, looked down at the serious little face. "I am busy, child." "Ribbon?" she insisted, taking the ribbon from his clumsy fingers. With the unhurried precision of a child, Lily tied a neat, simple bow. Thomas watched, mesmerized by the tiny act of competence. "There," she announced proudly. "Thank you, Lily," Thomas replied, a genuine smile momentarily transforming his severe expression. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single polished copper penny, a valuable item in a supply-starved town. A reward for a job well done. When Eleanor found out, she confronted him, not with gratitude but with concern. "Keep your coins, Captain," she said, presenting the penny back to him on a small, clean saucer. "I do not want my daughter to think the king's men are generous. She must not confuse kindness with loyalty." "Kindness is loyalty, Mrs. Hayes," Thomas retorted, pushing the saucer away. "A loyalty to one's own conscience. I am trying to retain mine in a war that asks us to discard it. Do not deny your daughter the simple lesson of a job rewarded." Eleanor hesitated. She looked at the copper penny, then at Thomas. She saw not the uniform, but the quiet determination in his eyes. "Very well," she relented, picking up the saucer. "But you will not confuse her, Captain. Her father died fighting men like you. She will not forget that. If you are finding yourself captivated by this intimate look at human connection in a time of war, now is the perfect moment to like this video. Help us reach more people who appreciate the depth and complexity of historical romance. Let us know in the comments. What do you think is the biggest secret Eleanor is hiding from Captain Ainsworth? Part 3. The Pressure of Perception. As the weeks turned into months, The situation grew increasingly volatile, both within the house and in Boston. The siege tightened, supplies dwindled, and the desperation of the British army grew. This external pressure only served to intensify the internal truce between Thomas and Eleanor. Their shared isolation forced a reliance that surpassed the terms of their initial agreement. Eleanor, using her small, hard-earned wages, would sneak small, vital comforts back into the house: a lump of rock sugar, a fresh egg, or a precious vial of medicinal spirits, all procured through her rebel connections. She did this not out of loyalty to Thomas, but to ensure his continued recovery, understanding that his presence, however odious, was the only thing standing between her and destitution. He, in turn, began to share his own limited stores of tea and quality brandy with her, a silent acknowledgement of her essential role. Their nightly conversations became less about politics and more about philosophy, literature, and the mundane sorrows of duty. Thomas discovered Eleanor had an education far exceeding what he had assumed for a colonial tradesman's wife. She had read Locke and Rousseau, her mind sharp and critical. She had a passion for the sea, having grown up watching the ships come and go from the port, a dream of freedom that had been extinguished by her marriage and the war. "You speak of duty, Captain," Eleanor challenged him one frigid night, leaning close to the fire, the shadows deepening the contours of her face. "But is it truly duty to uphold a king you have never met, against the cries of men fighting for the air they breathe?" "It is duty to the contract, Eleanor," Thomas replied carefully. He never used the word crown with her anymore. It was always the contract. "I took an oath to uphold the structure of governance. If every man decided his own sovereign, society would dissolve into anarchy. Your husband fought for ideals. I fight for order." Order without consent is tyranny," she whispered, her gaze piercing. "And consent without consequence is chaos," he countered. Yet even in their disagreement, there was respect. Thomas found himself looking forward to these nightly skirmishes of wit and principle, moments that felt more real than the forced politeness of his own social circle. Their greatest danger, however, came not from philosophy, but from suspicion. Sergeant Davies, who had always resented Eleanor, began to notice the small changes, the quality of the food, the swiftness of Thomas's recovery, the captain's increasing lack of patience with the usual harassment of local civilians. Davies, nursing a long-standing grievance, was already looking for a way to undermine Thomas. He found it in a small, careless mistake. One afternoon, Eleanor was mending Thomas's coat in the parlour while he worked on dispatches. Lily, playing quietly nearby, knocked over a small carved wooden box Thomas used to hold official seals. The seals scattered across the floor. Eleanor, reacting quickly, gathered them up, but as she placed them back, her eye caught the corner of a document pinned beneath Thomas's inkwell. A detailed map of the current British defensive positions around the town, marked with troop numbers, a critical piece of intelligence. Thomas, immersed in his work, didn't notice the fraction of a second her gaze lingered, calculating, absorbing the detail. But Sergeant Davies, entering the room to deliver a message, saw the moment. He saw the way Eleanor's eyes snapped up from the document, the sudden rigidness of her shoulders. He saw the shared, immediate tension that flashed between the captain and the widow. "Mrs. Hayes," Davies said, his voice flat and oily, "what were you doing near the captain's papers? Is the mending so vital that it must be done atop military dispatches?" "I was helping my daughter gather seals," Eleanor replied instantly, her voice smooth, but Thomas could feel the terror radiating from her. "Indeed," Davies drawled, his eyes narrowing on Thomas. "Careless of you, Captain, to leave classified documents so accessible to a civilian." Thomas, understanding the gravity of the accusation, rose slowly, leaning heavily on his cane, but projecting cold authority. The seals are administrative, Sergeant, not classified. Mrs. Hayes is employed and protected by me. Your insinuations are bordering on slander. Dismissed." Davies saluted, but the look he gave Thomas was one of triumph. He had his evidence. The officer was compromised, his judgment clouded by the rebel widow. Part 4. The inevitable crisis. The tension escalated immediately. Thomas knew Davies would report his suspicions to Major Cunningham, a strict, humorless officer known for his zeal in rooting out colonial sympathizers. They had little time. That evening, Thomas waited until the house was quiet. He found Eleanor in the kitchen, packing the remnants of their dinner. "Davies saw it," Thomas stated, his voice barely a whisper. "He saw you look at the map. He is going to report that you were attempting to gain intelligence. I defended you, but Cunningham will not tolerate the risk." Eleanor's face went white. "They will search the house. They will find nothing, Thomas. I haven't passed anything on." "It won't matter. The fact that you could is enough. They will use this as an excuse to seize you. They will separate you from Lily." Thomas grabbed her arm, his grip urgent. "We must execute the plan now. Tonight." The plan was the scheme Thomas had devised to smuggle Eleanor and Lily out of Boston to the relative safety of the countryside, where they could eventually secure passage to England under the guise of loyalist refugees. It was risky, requiring Thomas to forge travel papers and pay a smuggler, a severe crime against the Crown. "The papers are ready," Thomas continued, pulling a thick envelope from inside his coat. "The smuggler Finn waits for you at the old rope factory dock at midnight. You will pose as my cousin and her child, fleeing the city's unrest. Once out of the city, you will proceed to Portsmouth, where passage on a ship bound for Dartmouth is arranged. I have written to my solicitor in Kent. The Dower House is legally prepared to receive a tenant." Eleanor opened the envelope. Inside were 2 travel passes and a heavy purse of gold sovereigns. "This is too much, Thomas. You are giving away your inheritance for us." "It is nothing compared to what you deserve, Eleanor. Now listen closely. You must leave immediately. But there is one thing you must take that I cannot risk keeping." Eleanor's eyes searched his. "What?" Thomas limped over to the hearth and, with his cane, pried loose a small, loose brick near the base. He reached into the hollow and pulled out a small, oilcloth-wrapped cylinder. "When Silas Hayes died," Thomas said, handing her the package, "the troops cleared his body. They took everything of value, but I retrieved this from his boot. I did not give it back to you because I suspected it was something he did not want the British to find." Eleanor unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a small, beautifully carved ivory compass, no bigger than a thumbnail, of the kind used by cartographers. It was a flawless piece of work, clearly antique. "It was his," Eleanor whispered, tracing the curve of the ivory. "He never went anywhere without it. He told me it was the only piece of his true heritage he possessed." "It is more than sentiment, Eleanor," Thomas said, his voice grim. "This compass is a tool of espionage. I suspect your husband was not just a Minuteman, but a map-maker for the rebel cause. This would be damning proof against you if found now." "So, Silas was not just fighting for ideals," Eleanor said, a terrible understanding dawning in her eyes. "He was a spy, and I, his wife, am now fleeing with evidence provided by a British officer. The war has made us all traitors to something, Eleanor. You must take this. Keep it hidden. When you are safe in Kent, dispose of it. Or keep it, but never ever reveal what it is. It is the final piece of your husband's secret and my treason." Eleanor looked at the compass, then back at Thomas, her eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of gratitude, sorrow, and love. "Thomas," she whispered, stepping into his space, no longer concerned with appearances, "if I go, I will never see you again. Your debt is paid. You risked your life for my honor. I know, Thomas replied, his hand resting on her back. "But the sanctity of the promise is more important than the happiness of the man. My duty to you is to ensure your safety, and that is my only remaining duty in this wretched place." He leaned down and kissed her, a brief, hard contact that spoke volumes of shared danger, suppressed affection, and ultimate sacrifice. It was not a kiss of a lover, but of an intimate ally, a final sealing of their dangerous, secret pact. He pulled away, his face pale with pain and resolve. "Go, Eleanor, go now. I will provide a noisy distraction within the hour. Do not look back. Raise Lily with the peace she deserves." Eleanor took the compass, tucked it deep into her meagre shawl, took Lily's hand, and walked out the door of her own house, guided by the traitorous kindness of a wounded Redcoat officer. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful story of courage and complex love. If you were moved by the sacrifice Thomas made for Eleanor and Lily, show your appreciation by sharing this video with someone who needs to hear a story of light found in the darkest of times. And don't forget to subscribe for more profound historical romances.